Welcome to Analects of Wisdom, and thank you for joining us for our Sacred Texts Summarized series. Today, we journey into the vast and mysterious realm of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also known as the Bardo Thodol. This ancient text, simultaneously esoteric and surprisingly accessible, offers perspectives on the inescapable cycles of life, death, and the subtle thresholds that connect one state of being to another. Although it is closely associated with the rituals surrounding the end of a person's life, it is also a manual for the living, guiding us to confront change, impermanence, and uncertainty with a spirit of openness, compassion, and thoughtful curiosity. Before we venture deeper, take a moment to invite stillness into your mind. Allow the natural ebb and flow of your breath to draw your awareness into the present moment, and imagine that each inhale and exhale is a small journey, a microcosm of the continuous process of arising, enduring, and dissolving that characterizes all forms of existence. When we speak of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we step into a long-standing spiritual heritage that began with Padmasambhava, the great yogi often honored for firmly planting the seeds of Buddhism in Tibet during the 8th century. Many centuries later, the text itself is said to have been revealed as a terma, an intentionally hidden treasure, by Karma Lingpa. This practice of concealment and revelation is embedded in Tibetan religious culture, wherein certain texts are believed to have been hidden until a time when the world is ready to receive their teachings anew. Through this extraordinary lineage and tradition, the Bardo Thodol transcends time. Its insights as relevant today as they were hundreds of years ago. The term Bardo, translated into English, means an intermediate or in-between state, a gap that appears whenever we move from one mode of being to another. While it is often explained in relation to death and rebirth, it is vital to recognize that these in-between spaces encompass all phases of our daily reality as well. From the shift between waking and sleeping to the transitions in our relationships, careers, and outlook on life, these moments of crossing from one realm of experience to another hold a profound potential for awakening. The Tibetan Book of the Dead organizes these in-between states into three overarching categories: the Bardo of living, the Bardo of dying, and the Bardo of becoming. Yet to simply list these three is to only scratch the surface. Each domain is rich with its own challenges and opportunities, reflecting both universal truths about the human experience and nuanced insights particular to Tibetan Buddhist thought. The Bardo of living, which we currently inhabit, appears self-evident on the surface. We are, after all, alive at this moment. But the text reminds us that living itself is precarious and endlessly shifting. Our bodies change, our minds move from thought to thought, and our emotions wax and wane, sometimes in the span of seconds. Even entire eras of our life, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, fade and give way to something new. In this light, the Bardo of living is not just an ordinary backdrop of existence. It is an ever-moving stage upon which we can train ourselves to be more present, more compassionate, and more attuned to the impermanence that surrounds us. For the mindful observer, each day becomes an invitation to recognize that none of our experiences remain fixed, and that the ephemeral nature of our thoughts, sensations, and outer circumstances need not cause suffering if we meet them with clear awareness. Turning from the Bardo of living to the Bardo of dying, we encounter teachings that are both profoundly comforting and deeply challenging. These instructions were traditionally recited or read aloud to someone who is on the brink of death or has just passed away, offering practical counsel as the physical body dissolves and consciousness becomes untethered from its usual anchor in the physical world. According to Tibetan cosmology, death proceeds in stages as the elemental forces of earth, water, fire, and air break down, leading to experiences of unusual clarity, confusion, or both. Here, the Tibetan Book of the Dead functions almost like a spiritual guidebook, reminding the disembodied consciousness to recognize the luminous displays, the brilliant colors, lights, and images as reflections of its own inherent luminosity. However, without proper preparation, what should be a revelation of one's own spiritual radiance can appear alien or terrifying. Fear, fueled by long-standing habit patterns, can mask the possibility of liberation. Thus, the text repeatedly encourages calm acceptance and unwavering presence, an attitude that can allow the consciousness to pass through these extraordinary visions unscathed and possibly even attain a state of lasting freedom from suffering. Beyond the threshold of death, the Bardo of Becoming unfolds, describing a phase between one physical incarnation and the next. Tibetan Buddhist teachings speak of consciousness wandering through this intermediate state, shaped and propelled by the karmic traces cultivated during life. The illusions, desires and fears that shaped one's everyday conduct continue to operate here, magnified by the unsettling freedom of no longer being anchored to the physical body. This freedom, while it may seem daunting, also provides an opening for liberation. At any point in the Bardo experience, consciousness can realize that these elaborate visions, both peaceful and wrathful, are manifestations of the mind's boundless creative capacity. The luminous mind, if recognized, can cut through the illusions that otherwise bind us to cyclical existence. One of the most liberating messages of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is that there is never a moment in which awakening is off limits. These concepts, of course, are steeped in a specific religious and cultural framework, yet the practical wisdom they offer is strikingly universal. Even if we set aside the doctrines of rebirth or the precise details of karmic continuity, the text's fundamental call remains clear: life is change, and every transition can serve as a catalyst for greater insight. In daily life, we witness our own smaller cycles of birth and death, the end of a job, the dissolution of a friendship, the decision to leave an old habit behind, or the unveiling of new perspectives that radically shift our worldview. It can be surprising to discover how much fear arises when the familiar gives way to the unknown. We may cling desperately to an old identity, resist a new opportunity, or shrink from the luminous possibility that beckons us beyond our comfort zone. The Tibetan Book of the Dead reminds us that these smaller bardos are test runs for the ultimate transitions yet to come, and that by learning to face them with openness, we develop resilience and compassion. Part of the text's brilliance lies in how directly it speaks about the nature of illusion. Reading or hearing the Tibetan Book of the Dead, one might initially be dazzled by the descriptions of radiant colours, divine beings, and sometimes fearsome apparitions. Yet, according to these teachings, these glorious and frightening images exist not as external realities, but as reflections of our own mind. The seeds of these illusions lie within us, woven together by our habits of anger, attachment, pride, ignorance and jealousy, forces commonly referred to as the 5 poisons in Tibetan Buddhist psychology. The text insists that once we stop grasping at these illusions, and once we start identifying them for what they are, we can discover a deeper, more authentic reality shining through the cracks. In a sense, we are invited to bring that same penetrating insight into our day-to-day experience. How many times do we become lost in the illusions of our own creation? How often do we misinterpret a colleague's remark or a loved one's silence, filling in the void with stories that may have no real substance? Meditation emerges as the primary tool for coming to terms with these illusions. It is no accident that nearly every Tibetan Buddhist teaching emphasizes the practice of mindfulness and the cultivation of calm abiding. By sitting quietly, noticing how thoughts arise and dissolve, we gain familiarity with the ephemeral nature of our internal landscape. This practice can illuminate the direct correlation between our mental habits and the sense of peace or turmoil we experience in daily life. For those on the cusp of death, or for spiritual adepts preparing for that final journey, more specialized methods, like Phowa, the transference of consciousness, are often employed. Phowa involves directing the mind with precision at the moment of death to merge with enlightened awareness or ensure a positive rebirth. Yet, even if such advanced practices seem distant from our everyday concerns, basic mindfulness and the cultivation of loving kindness can be powerful steps toward dismantling the illusions that keep us bound. The core message here extends far beyond the confines of strictly Tibetan Buddhist audiences. All humans share the same existential questions. What happens when we die? What is the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the body? How can we deal skillfully with the many endings, big and small, that colour our days? The Tibetan Book of the Dead approaches these universal questions head-on, offering a roadmap that marries poetic imagery with practical guidance. Although parts of it may feel foreign due to cultural differences, the heart of its teachings resonates with a deep longing for truth that transcends geographic and temporal boundaries. It's a testament to the text's enduring appeal that it continues to be read, studied, and cherished well beyond the monasteries and villages of Tibet. For many practitioners, the instructions of the Tibetan Book of the Dead provide an anchor of sorts in the face of uncertainty. Whether it's the moment of sitting vigil with a dying loved one, or the reflection we do each morning on how to live with more mindfulness. These teachings remind us that fear arises most powerfully in the face of the unknown, and so it is essential to befriend the unknown, to lean into it with the support of wisdom, compassion, and a willingness to step beyond our usual patterns of thought. Fear, in this philosophy, is not something to be crushed. Rather, it is to be understood and transformed by seeing that it is almost always based on misunderstanding or ignorance of the true nature of mind. Little by little, we come to see that each moment, whether joyous or painful, holds a lesson about letting go. And in letting go, we discover the spaciousness to appreciate the miracle of being alive, even when life brings adversity. This emphasis on facing and transforming fear dovetails with the Tibetan Book of the Dead's teaching on luminosity and clarity. The text often describes the mind's most fundamental state as inherently luminous, pure, and unclouded by dualistic thinking. At pivotal junctures in the dying process, that luminosity dawns vividly, offering a glimpse of reality unfiltered by the usual habits and narratives. When a person is unprepared or governed by fear, they may recoil from such radiant clarity, finding it overwhelming. But for someone who has contemplated these teachings, meditated, and grown used to the idea that mind itself is as vast as the sky, the moment of death can be met with awe rather than panic. Here we see the great paradox. What might seem like a loss from the outside can become the ultimate freedom from within. As the illusions of daily life drop away, one can recognize the brilliant field of awareness that has been present all along. Translating these insights back into our daily existence, we begin to see that smaller glimpses of this luminosity often surface in ordinary moments. Watching the sunrise, engaging in creative work, or even pausing in silence amidst a bustling day. It is in these micro-bardos, these gentle shifts of perspective, that the underlying teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead find their practical application. Just as the text encourages the dying to remain unafraid of the kaleidoscopic visions emerging in the after-death state, we can train ourselves to remain unafraid of the constant flux of thoughts and emotions arising in our minds right now. We can remind ourselves that none of these phenomena, whether dreamlike or concrete, possess an enduring essence. They appear, transform, and dissolve back into the vastness of being. Recognizing this can help us cultivate a more resilient and compassionate outlook, fostering a sense of solidarity with all beings who endure their own storms of change. Part of the reason these teachings continue to captivate our modern imagination is their invitation to reconcile the spiritual with the psychological. While the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a religious text, much of what it addresses can be taken as an exploration of the human psyche. The radiant deities and terrifying apparitions described in the after-death states can be understood as archetypal energies, the peaceful and wrathful aspects of mind that we all harbour. The process of encountering these energies openly without grasping or recoiling parallels the work of therapeutic integration, where one learns to accept all dimensions of oneself. Hence, even outside of formal spiritual practice, this text nudges us toward deep self-inquiry. Which aspects of our own being do we demonize or reject, and which do we idealize? How might acknowledging the full spectrum of our inner life bring us closer to wholeness, both psychologically and spiritually? To say that the Tibetan Book of the Dead is about death is both true and incomplete. It is about death, yes, but it is also about life and about the nature of reality itself. If we see death as one transition among many, albeit the ultimate one in physical terms, then we can view the smaller transitions in life as invaluable opportunities for rehearsal. The heartbreak of lost love, the shaking of identity when we lose a job, the discomfort of stepping outside our comfort zone. These all become moments in which the illusions we cling to become more visible. Painful though they may be, they also provide a chance to shed layers of misunderstanding, revealing the luminous awareness that abides beneath the clutter of our everyday thoughts. From this vantage, the entire human journey can be seen as a prolonged apprenticeship in the art of letting go. For people who practice Tibetan Buddhism, the text is not only studied but also integrated into rituals surrounding dying and death. Family members or spiritual mentors read the instructions aloud to those nearing their end, or to those who have just passed, in the hope that the clarity of the words will spark recognition in the consciousness of the one in transition. It's a humble yet potent gesture. By offering these teachings, loved ones help guide the departing individual through territory that, though seemingly unknown, has actually been mapped in great detail by centuries of meditative insight. Outside of Tibet, there are individuals from different cultures who have embraced these rituals, finding solace in the perspective that dying can be a sacred transformation rather than a fearful punctuation mark. In this respect, the Tibetan Book of the Dead fosters a sense of communal responsibility. How we support each other at pivotal thresholds can ease or intensify suffering, both for ourselves and for those we care about. At this point, let us pause and reflect on how these teachings might shape our day-to-day existence. Consider all the small endings you've experienced recently, whether it was saying goodbye to a friend, concluding a long workday, or transitioning from one set of priorities to another. Consider, too, the new beginnings that emerged in their wake, fresh interests, new relationships, or simply a different perspective on your life's direction. Each shift, however mundane, mirrors the larger cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In paying closer attention, we may learn to navigate these shifts more gracefully. We might notice the precise moment when excitement turns to anxiety, or the subtle instant when we cling to an idea we fear losing. Cultivating mindfulness in these everyday bardos can gradually equip us to face the final bardo with a steadier heart. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, above all, reminds us that fear and uncertainty are not barriers, but invitations. Rather than shutting down in the face of change, we can learn to open up, to meet the unfamiliar with a sense of reverence and curiosity. In effect, this text calls us to practice death every day, not in a morbid way, but in a manner that allows us to see all endings, both small and large, as intrinsic elements of a natural process. Life becomes a continuous dance of coming into being and passing away, and if we can relax our grip and observe it honestly, we may find that the very notion of separation from this dance is illusory. As we draw our exploration to a close, allow yourself to rest for a moment in the quiet space of listening. Reflect on the depth of what you've heard and how it resonates with your own intuition about life, death, and the intervals in between. If something within these teachings has stirred your curiosity, consider investigating further, perhaps by reading more translations of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or by exploring meditation practices that orient the mind toward greater clarity and compassion. And if you find these insights especially meaningful, you might share them with someone who is wrestling with change, grief, or existential uncertainty. In doing so, you carry forward the spirit of this time-honored text, which was never intended to remain bound by culture or epoch, but to offer a universal blueprint for navigating life's transitions with wisdom and courage. Thank you for journeying with us on this extended exploration of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. May its message, deeply rooted in the mystery of being, continue to echo in your thoughts and guide your actions as you move through the myriad bardos of your own life. May you find the space to release fear, recognize illusion, and see the luminous nature that pervades even the darkest corners of existence. And above all, may you realize that within the constant cycle of coming and going lies an unshakable essence, a clarity that awaits our recognition in every waking moment and finally at the threshold of death itself.